Like most of the people who grew up in the post 9/11 era, I became acquainted during my adolescence with a lot of the darker aspects of the world in terms of politics. Having grown up in the United States, which is the epicenter of global imperialism, this learning process was especially dramatic for me. I learned about how my country has assembled the largest and most intrusive surveillance state in world history. How my country has been at war since I was around 1 year old. How my country has some of the largest inequality in the industrialized world. How my country was waging drone wars that regularly killed innocent people. That my country had invaded Iraq in 2003 based on lies. These were the kinds of things that I was processing during my formative political years. As I continued to study the situation, I found that no one who has a significant position of power in this country can be trusted. I found that there is an entire party, the Republican Party, that not just perpetuates but happily embraces the policies of endless war, economic exploitation, the oppression of marginalized groups, and state authoritarianism. And the Democrats and Obama, who postured as the good guys, basically embrace the same policies but use different rhetoric. Throughout 2016, I found that even Bernie Sanders, who postures as an outsider, will ultimately cave into the system when he's prompted to. Me and many, I'm of course talking about the moment when me and many others saw Sanders endorse Clinton after being having the election blatantly stolen from him. I was in denial about that for a while. I rationalized it as Sanders just doing what he had to, but as my political development continued throughout the Trump era, I came to recognize that Sanders was really showing how he represents the same system that the rest of Washington represents. I began to yearn for something truly radical and change-making. I began to frequent the World Socialist website, and I absorbed so many of their ideas about the inherently destructive nature of capitalism, about the untrustworthiness of institutions like the Democratic Socialists of America as a result of the DSA's association with the Democratic Party. I learned from the World Socialist website that we really can't trust Bernie Sanders, both because of his affiliation with the Democratic Party and because of his imperialist policies, but also because Sanders and other progressive politicians like him are ultimately bourgeois like the rest of the political establishment. I absorbed these ideas, and I appreciated the World Socialist website's analysis about various political topics. I started to move in the direction of getting more involved in the World Socialist website's party, the Socialist Equality Party, and I even began to repeat some of the World Socialist website's rhetoric about the need for Trotskyism as an alternative to the established to the more common Stalinist approach towards socialism. And for a while this worked. But then I started to learn more. I got involved in various communist communities online, and I saw that in spite of the rhetoric from the Trotskyists at the WSWS and from my former literary idol, George Orwell, there are many people who still support figures like Stalin, Mao, and the Korea's Kims. I wondered why there would be modern socialists who support these figures. Why do they uphold these figures, and why do they admire the states like the USSR and China? It turned out that I was wrong, and that so much of the Western left was wrong. The whole community of Western First World socialists that I became absorbed into as I entered the sphere of socialism was really mistaken about the nature of communist movements throughout the last century or so. I found out that Stalin and Mao did not kill many millions of people, and that they were not even dictators. I found out that the USSR and China, including China in its modern form, are not the dictatorships that they're made out to be. That they were very much democratic, and are in fact more democratic than any bourgeois democracy can honestly claim to be. I studied the truth about North Korea. I learned how lies about the DPRK get fabricated and spread around, and how the DPRK can accurately be called a workers' democracy, and that the claim that North Korea is a monarchy is really a very racist lie. I learned these fundamental truths, and I started on what I think has been the most important journey, a part of my political journey so far. Having recognized the popular misconceptions about the nature and histories of the socialist states throughout the last century, and given up the fallacious rhetoric of that wasn't real socialism, I came to understand the situation of global politics more clearly. The nature of my task as a revolutionary came better into focus. I realized that every part of the crisis that I had been navigating throughout my political journey, the dystopic political situation, the fecklessness of politicians, the myopic worldview of Western First World leftists, was the result of material conditions that have a clear source and that can be corrected. This underlying mesh of material factors isn't merely the existence of capitalism, but also the existence of the especially noxious manifestation of capitalism that has a presence in the United States. The United States is a settler colonial country that now functions as the center for global imperialism and has centered as the main player of global imperialism for several generations. The U.S. is the country that whose people, as a result of this, are constantly bombarded with propaganda to get them to fear the designated enemies. The U.S. is a country with the CIA, which has been working intensively to develop ways to manipulate public sentiments. As a result of this, the United States is deeply within the grips of bourgeois power. Not the kind of bourgeois power that would that's in less stable capitalist countries like Chile, but the kind of bourgeois power that comes after a process of genocide, decades of intensive imperial conquest around the globe, and intensive propaganda to get the United States more like countries like Chile and Ecuador, which are experiencing anti-neoliberal revolutions because they're members of the especially exploited third world, and because their indigenous populations have more of a cultural presence. We'll need to defeat the ingrained system of indoctrination and propaganda that has such a deep presence in the United States. We'll need to break through the indoctrination that's made so many Americans hate countries like China, the DPRK, Cuba, and other socialist states, and get Americans to a healthy point, to a place that's based in reality and not delusion that's been foisted upon them by generations of capitalist propaganda. In other words, we need to build up the Marxist-Leninist movement within the United States, because the Marxist-Leninist movement is the strain of anti-capitalism that's both has the most historically proven revolutionary success, and that's perhaps most ideologically equipped to counter the propaganda of the bourgeoisie. Unlike Trotskyism or anarchism, Marxism-Leninism is based in a scientific view of socialism that encourages a mentality of pragmatism towards countries like China, that lets people look at socialist experiments like China and acknowledge their flaws while recognizing that they are legitimate experiments in socialism that must be supported. If we can get the broader American left to go down the political journey that I experienced, we'll make the United States much better equipped for a proletarian revolution. Let's build this movement. Let's get people educated. All power to the workers.